The night shift in the emergency room carried a weight that only those who lived it could understand. The air smelled of antiseptic and lingering exhaustion. The lights hummed low, and every sound felt sharper than it should. Nora Hale had worked as an ER nurse for 3 years, but tonight fatigue clung to her bones like lead. 16 hours on her feet had left her eyelids heavy and her hands trembling whenever she scrawled notes on patient charts. She told herself that 1 more hour would pass, and then she could collapse into her bed, close her eyes, and let silence carry her away. She was about to lean back in her chair when the ER doors slammed open so hard they ricocheted off the walls. 2 men in black suits staggered in, half carrying, half dragging a tall figure between them. His white shirt was soaked crimson, the fabric clinging to his chest. For a second, Nora thought her weary eyes were playing tricks, but then the metallic smell of blood cut through the disinfectant and jolted her awake. She jumped to her feet, heart hammering. The stranger lifted his head just enough for the overhead lights to sweep across his face. Gray eyes met hers, piercing and cold, commanding like he was not pleading for help but issuing an order. That gaze froze her in place before instinct took over. She yanked a gurney into place and barked commands to the suited men. Lay him down now. They obeyed without a word, setting him onto the bed with clumsy haste, then retreating toward the doors as though terrified of staying in the room too long. Ultimately, it was just Nora, the bleeding man, and the rest of the world locked out. She cut open his shirt and bit her lip when she saw the wound. A clean slash carved across his ribcage, deep enough to bleed him dry if left untended, but deliberate in a way that spoke of blades rather than accidents. Her gloves quickly turned slick. Her mind raced with questions. Who was he? What kind of life led someone to arrive at midnight, escorted by silent men in black, body ripped open by steel? She disinfected the wound, the smell of alcohol stinging her nose. He didn't even flinch, only twitched when raw flesh burned beneath her touch. Exasperation laced with fear rose in her chest. "You know you're lucky I hadn't gone home yet," she muttered, trying to keep her voice steady. "Otherwise, you would have bled out in some back alley." He gave the faintest smile, so thin and weary it was barely there. "I do not die that easily," he said, voice low and rough. Nora felt anger flare in her chest. Blood was pouring out of him like a waterfall, yet he acted as though death could never reach him. Her hands stitched swiftly, each needle puncture carving deeper into her nerves, as though she were sewing shut her heart. The room filled with the sound of thread snapping, scissors cutting, and his heavy breaths. He was silent otherwise, but his silence was not emptiness. It was a fortress. Every brick of that wall carried secrets she had no right to touch. Secrets of danger and loneliness so palpable it thickened the air. She dared not ask more questions, for fear he might actually answer and draw her deeper into whatever shadow followed him. When she finished bandaging the gash, she looked up, ready to scold him again. But his eyes stopped her. They were no longer glinting with ice. Weariness, raw and human, flickered there for a heartbeat. She said, "Stay for observation," surprising herself with how gentle she sounded. Infection could set in. He shook his head with terrifying calm and rose as though the wound were nothing more than a scratch. His hand trembled faintly as he picked up his blood-stained jacket, but his gaze remained unbroken. Nora blocked his path, her body barely tall enough to bar the way. "Where are you going? That wound needs care." He leaned close, so near she caught the faint trace of cologne mingling with the metallic tang of blood. His voice dropped into a husky whisper, each word a warning heavy as lead. "You should not get involved with me." And then he walked out. The automatic doors hissed shut behind him, leaving a faint streak of red across the white floor. Nora stood frozen, her heart pounding so loudly she swore the entire hospital could hear it. Her hands shook as though the needle were still between her fingers. A stranger with gray eyes had arrived bleeding, dropped a warning into her life like a blade, and vanished into the night. She told herself firmly that she would never see him again. He belonged to a world beyond her reach that she wanted no part of. She was a nurse. Her job was to patch wounds, not unravel their mysteries. Yet, some instinct whispered beneath her denial that this was not the end but the first crack in her life she thought was ordinary. The storm had just brushed her door, and storms never leave quietly. The night dragged on in a blur of more minor emergencies. a boy with a fractured arm from falling off a bike. An older woman is struggling with breathlessness, and a man is complaining of chest pains. Nora worked with her usual precision, yet her mind drifted again and again to the trail of blood that had led out of her ward. She swore she still smelled his cologne beneath the antiseptic each time she washed her hands. Each time she glanced at the empty gurney, she remembered those gray eyes that had warned her away but bound her to his fate all the same. When morning finally came, pale light seeping through the hospital windows, exhaustion swallowed her whole. She signed out, changed out of her scrubs, and dragged herself back to her small apartment. The kettle whistled. Coffee filled the room with its comforting aroma, and for a moment she allowed herself to believe that the night had been a fever dream. She pulled open the curtains, sipping her mug. The street outside looked ordinary. Cars parked where they always parked, children waiting for school buses, neighbors chatting on stoops. But something gnawed at her, a prickling under her skin that no amount of caffeine could shake away. She told herself again that she would never see him again, that her path and his had crossed once only to diverge forever. Yet she could not silence the echo of his words. "You should not get involved with me." She whispered into her cup, a tremor she did not want to admit slipping into her voice. Too late. The storm was coming, and it had already chosen her as part of its path. Nora Hale dreamed of silence, but woke to thunder that did not belong to the sky. Engines roared outside her window, a low growl that rattled her apartment walls. She blinked against the pale morning light, clutching her coffee mug with both hands as though warmth alone could tether her to normalcy. But when she stepped onto the balcony, her street had transformed into a scene no neighborhood should ever hold. 3 black SUVs lined the curb in formation. A van blocked the narrow entrance, its tinted windows reflecting the sunlight like dark shields. Men in tailored suits fanned across the pavement, some sketching notes on the hood of a car, others scanning rooftops with the sharp focus of hunters. Their earpieces glinted, their boots moved in unison. The quiet block, usually home to children playing and an older woman watering geraniums, had become a fortress overnight. Her coffee nearly slipped from her hand. Neighbors began to stir. Curtains fluttered, voices rose, and whispers spread like wildfire. The older woman downstairs clutched her cat against her chest, calling up to Nora. "Is this a movie set, dear?" 3 kids pressed their faces against the glass across the street, cheering as though action heroes had landed in their midst. A man cursed about the blocked traffic. What once was ordinary had been consumed by something larger, something suffocating. The doorbell rang. Nora set her mug down with a shaky clink, pulled on a cardigan, and opened the door. The man standing before her was composed to the point of being unnerving. Mid-30s, suit precise, hair slicked back without a strand out of place. His dark eyes carried calm calculation as though even her apartment doorway was part of a chessboard. He handed her a card with both hands and bowed slightly. "Good morning, Miss Hale. I am Rafe Arden, private security detail." Nora stared, her throat tightening. Security detail for whom? Rafe's voice remained smooth, professional, every syllable rehearsed. "For the man you saved last night. You are now considered his savior. That makes you a potential target. We are here to secure your safety." Her spine chilled. Enemies. Targets. She gripped the doorknob, fighting the urge to slam the door. "Do you people hear yourselves? I am a nurse. I saved a man's life. That is all." Rafe tilted his head slightly as though listening to a voice only he could hear through the earpiece. Then he returned his gaze to her. "We reviewed the hospital's security footage. His enemies will have done the same. Miss Hale, you would no longer be uninvolved if they saw your face. This is not speculation. It is a minimal protocol." Minimal protocol? The words made her stomach twist. She looked past him and saw 2 guards setting up something that looked disturbingly like a checkpoint at the end of her hallway. Her voice rose in frustration. "Your minimal protocol is ruining the entire block. You jammed the mail truck. My neighbor thinks she is about to have a heart attack." Rafe's expression did not change. "The mailman has been cleared. No explosives. As for the neighbor, we have provided compensation." He gestured calmly toward the older woman, now standing with a brand-new pink cat carrier clutched to her chest. A suited man bowed before her with rehearsed politeness, carrying a bag labeled bread. Nora pressed her forehead to the doorframe, caught between disbelief and fury. What is happening to my life? Inside her apartment, the chaos echoed louder than her thoughts. Men in black suits moved with precision, but she refused to let them through her door. Her apartment was hers, a sanctuary of cracked teacups, basil growing in a tin can, and the faint smell of lavender soap. No invasion could steal that from her. She drew a line. No one comes inside. No one follows me to the bathroom. No one lurks outside my windows with scanners. This is my home, not your command post. Rafe nodded, pulling a small notebook from his jacket as though she were dictating treaty terms. Understood. Perimeter only. No entry. No surveillance within the residence. And yet his eyes lingered, unreadable. He added with a note of gravity, "Miss Hale, we cannot ignore the reality. Last night, an incident occurred. You were seen. The people who hunt him will not hesitate to hunt you." Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, 2 lines of text. "Sorry for the noise. I will take responsibility. Signed DV." Nora froze, her chest tightened, her mind pulling together fragments from the night before. The gray eyes that warned her away, the faint trace of cologne mixed with blood, the voice that told her she should not get involved. She typed back before she could stop herself. "I do not need a Hollywood film crew outside my house. Send them away now." Typing dots appeared, vanished. Silence stretched. Then, finally, a reply. "I cannot, just today. Do not go outside." Rafe's voice cut through the tension, polite but firm. "We will reduce the visible presence. We will clear the street. But please remain indoors until noon." He handed her another sheet of paper, a hotline with labeled contacts. One entry caught her eye. "Grocery supply team." Her jaw tightened. "You cannot be serious." Rafe's calm eyes did not waver. The bread was only the beginning. "3 conditions," Nora said slowly. Every word weighted with defiance. 1. No aiming weapons at my neighbors. 2. Do not block the garbage truck. 3. Do not call me a target or asset. I am a human being. "Understood," Rafe said, jotting every condition as though they were orders from his commander. "We will refer to you as a medical client." Nora wanted to laugh, to cry, to scream, but exhaustion and fear bound her throat. She slammed the door and leaned against it, her fingers trembling. Outside, footsteps echoed like drumbeats. The world had shifted overnight, and she was trapped in the middle of a story she had never agreed to tell. Her phone buzzed again, a call this time, the same unknown number. Her heart hammered as she answered. "Are you safe?" The voice was husky, raw, muffled as though he spoke through clenched teeth. "You," Nora whispered, clutching the phone so tightly her knuckles blanched. "You are the man from last night." There was silence, broken only by the faint rush of wind over the line. When he spoke again, his words carried both command and something softer, almost hidden. "Do not be afraid. I will not let anyone touch you." "Who are you?" she pressed. "Who are you really?" Silence again, his voice returned, steady as steel but scarred by weariness. "I owe you a life." Nora's throat ached. "You do not owe me anything. I was doing my job. But your life, your world, is trampling all over mine." Another pause, then a quiet exhale. "Just today, Nora. I will fix it." The line went dead. She stared at the dark screen, helplessness curling inside her chest. His words had been a shield, yet the weight behind them felt like chains. She whispered to herself, though no one could hear, "Just today." But deep down, she knew storms do not obey calendars. This was no simple day of protection. This was the beginning of something relentless that had already chosen her, whether she wanted it or not. The morning after felt like a lie Nora could almost believe. Sunlight poured gently across her kitchen, the steam of fresh coffee wound upward, and her basil plant leaned toward the window as if the night before had never happened. She pressed her palms to the porcelain cup, letting the heat sink into her tired bones, whispering that life was still ordinary. But beneath the calm veneer, Her chest buzzed with unease, a vibration she could not still. Her phone lay on the table, screen dark, but she could not stop glancing at it. The text from earlier pulsed like a ghost in her mind. Sorry for the noise. I will take responsibility. I signed the DV. The initials were too stark and too precise. They carried the memory of gray eyes and a warning that had altered her path. She told herself not to respond, not to engage. But her fingers had already betrayed her once, typing back before her mind could object. A sharp knock startled her from her thoughts. It is not the firm rhythm of Rafe Arden's men, but something softer, deliberate, and respectful. She hesitated before opening the door, half expecting another suited stranger. Instead, a plain package sat neatly on the mat. Brown paper folded with care, tied with a string. She picked it up warily, heart thudding as she carried it inside. Inside lay sterile bandages, a box of chamomile tea, and a handwritten note on heavy paper. The script was sharp, and every stroke was controlled. Rest. I am sorry for the intrusion. DV. Nora sank into a chair, the package trembling in her lap. She did not want these things. She wanted the silence she had before him. Yet her fingers traced the ink, and she hated that the gesture struck her deeper than any bouquet of roses ever could. The day dragged forward under watchful eyes. Suited men still lingered at corners, though fewer than before, their movements careful enough not to stir the neighborhood into panic. Rafe stood at his post like a shadow carved from stone, nodding politely whenever she passed by. She wanted to scream at him, to order them all away, but something heavier held her back. She remembered the man's voice over the phone, low and weary. I will not let anyone touch you. By afternoon, the roar of another engine broke the fragile calm. A sleek black car slid into the street. Its polished exterior caught the sunlight, blinding. Neighbors leaned out of windows again, their whispers swelling. The doors opened. A tall man stepped out, his navy suit pressed flawlessly, his silver tie gleaming, his polished shoes striking the pavement with deliberate rhythm. Nora's breath caught. Gone was the torn shirt drenched in blood. Gone was the pale face hidden behind exhaustion. The man before her was carved from power itself. His shoulders squared, his stride confident, his presence filling the entire street. He removed his sunglasses slowly, and gray eyes met hers once more. Not the eyes of a wounded stranger now, but of someone who owned the world and carried its weight with casual command. A ripple passed through the gathered crowd. Someone whispered his name, hesitant at first, then louder as recognition spread like fire. Damien Voss, the mogul, the man whose empire spanned finance, real estate, and half the city skyline. His name carried both awe and fear, a force people spoke in boardrooms but never expected to see on their quiet street. Nora froze at the threshold of her door. The truth hit her like cold water. The stranger she had stitched under fluorescent lights was not an ordinary patient. He was one of the most powerful men in the city. Damien walked toward her without hesitation, each step shrinking the distance between their worlds. When he stopped in front of her, the air seemed to still. He slid his glasses into his pocket and spoke in a voice low enough for her alone. I should have told you sooner. I am Damien Voss, and the moment you stitched me last night, you stepped into my world. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her world, she thought of balance sheets, land auctions, and the headlines of financial magazines. Then she thought of the wound across his ribs, the blood pooling under her gloves. Dangerous in every sense. Your world, she managed at last, sarcasm sharp enough to hide her shaking. You mean the world of stocks and mergers. Sounds perfectly safe. A faint smile curved his mouth, though his eyes remained unyielding. More dangerous than you think. In my world, every deal can be paid for in blood. Nora's breath hitched. His warning last night echoed anew. Do not get involved with me. And yet, despite every reason to shut the door, she could not move. The neighbors' murmurs grew louder, cameras of phones flashing discreetly. Damien's gray eyes softened just slightly as they caught hers. He leaned closer, enough that she could feel the weight of his presence without touch. Because you saved me, he he murmured. "They will come after you, and I cannot allow that." Her heart stumbled. She hated the certainty in his voice, hated that she felt the truth of it. Around them the street buzzed with speculation, every neighbor craning to catch a glimpse. Heat rushed to her cheeks and she pulled him quickly inside, slamming the door on the stairs outside. Silence dropped like a curtain in her small apartment. Damien stood in the cramped space with practiced ease, his suit out of place against chipped mugs and thrift store furniture. He loosened his tie, sank onto her sofa, and for a fleeting moment closed his eyes. Nora crossed her arms, refusing to let the quiet soften her. "I never imagined I would be involved with a finance mogul. This is wild." Damien opened his eyes again, sharp and unwavering. "Insane or not, I will not let anyone hurt you." She shook her head, frustration biting. "Your world and mine are worlds apart. I do not belong in it." He leaned forward, his gaze steady as steel. "That is why I will stand with you." The words unsettled her more than any threat could have. They were not promises she wanted, yet they planted themselves in her chest, impossible to uproot. As evening fell, rumors burned across the city like wildfire. Whispers spread that Damien Voss had a secret connection to an ordinary nurse. Boardrooms buzzed with speculation, and in the shadow of these whispers, one man listened with sharp interest. Victor Lang, Damien's oldest rival. A predator in silk, he never believed in coincidence. To him, anyone standing beside Damien was not a savior, but a weakness to exploit. Nora had no idea that eyes had already turned toward her. She only knew that her ordinary life had fractured, the pieces scattered beyond reach. She sat in the quiet of her apartment, the chamomile tea still steeping on the counter, and admitted to herself what she had feared since last night. The storm had not brushed past her. It had stepped fully inside, wearing a navy suit and gray eyes that carried promise and peril. And whether she wanted it or not, she was already caught within its circle. The city was a cauldron of whispers by the time the sun set. The name Damien Voss already carried storms wherever it was spoken. But now those storms had a new center, a nurse named Nora Hale. Boardrooms hummed with gossip. Newspaper offices drafted speculative headlines. In dim bars, where business people shed their masks, bets were placed on how long an ordinary woman could last in the shadow of a king. Nora herself felt the shift in the smallest, cruelest ways. On her way to work, she noticed a man in a wrinkled shirt who pretended to read a newspaper but never once turned a page. At the hospital, someone sat in the waiting room for hours, a baseball cap pulled low, eyes tracking her every move without asking for treatment. At first, she dismissed it as paranoia, but the truth pressed harder with each passing day. A target she had never wanted had been painted across her life. One evening, as she returned from another draining shift, she found him waiting at her door. Damien leaned against the railing, his posture deceptively casual, but the gray eyes that lifted to hers carried no ease. "Someone is investigating you," he said bluntly. "It is Lang. He wants to use you against me." Her bag slid from her shoulder onto the chair with a thud. She pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. "I told you, I wanted to live every day, I told you. And now what?" Damien's voice did not waver. "There is no turning back. If I want to protect you, I must make something clear." She looked at him, exasperation tightening her chest. And what would that be? His answer came sharp as a blade. "You will become my girlfriend, in name only." For a heartbeat, she thought she misheard. Then she laughed, bitter and hollow. "Your girlfriend? Ridiculous. Do you think saying that aloud will make Victor Lang vanish?" "At the very least, it will make him hesitate," Damien said, eyes burning with conviction. "To a man like Lang, the women in my life are untouchable ground. If he dares, it becomes a direct war with me." Nora stared at him, incredulous. "So that is what I am now, a human shield." "Number." His gaze softened for the first time in days. "You are the only person who has ever saved me without asking for anything. You deserve protection, even if the cost is this." Her heart stumbled at the rawness in his tone. She wanted to scream at him, to slam the door in his face, but some fragile part of her trembled with the weight of those words. The next day, she walked out of the hospital after another night shift and found herself ambushed by a storm of cameras. Reporters surged forward, their voices overlapping. "Are you Damien Voss's new girlfriend? Where did you meet? How does an ordinary nurse capture the heart of the city's most powerful man?" Her face went pale, her chest constricting as microphones and flashes crowded her. She tried to retreat, but the wall of bodies closed in tighter. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Then a black car screeched to a halt at the curb. The door opened and Damien stepped out, his dark suit immaculate, his stride purposeful, his presence cutting through the frenzy like a blade. For a fleeting second, even the reporters fell silent. He crossed the pavement without hesitation, wrapped an arm around Nora's shoulders, and drew her against him. "That is enough," he said, his voice low but carrying like thunder. "She is my girlfriend." Cameras snapped wildly, gasps rippled. The gray fire in his eyes was unrelenting as he looked into the sea of lenses. "Touch her, and you touch me." The air froze. No one dared step forward. Even the most brazen reporter's hands shook, shudders trembling under the weight of his authority. Nora stood frozen in his arms, her heart racing like it might tear free from her chest. Heat flooded her body, anger mixing with something she could not name. She wanted to shove him away, to shout at him for dragging her into a spectacle she never agreed to. But the warmth of his arm, the steady thundering of his heartbeat against her shoulder, unraveled her anger even as it rose. Only when he guided her into the car, and they drove away from the storm of cameras, did her fury finally break free. "You have lost your mind in front of everyone. You declared me your girlfriend." Damien leaned back, his gaze never leaving hers. "Did you see how they did not dare touch you anymore? That is why." Her voice shook with rage. "You turned me into a piece in your power game." "No," he said, leaning closer, his hand brushing hers in a way that made her flinch. "I just want you to be safe. And sometimes safety requires a declaration." She turned to the window, hiding the flush that rose against her will. Outside, the city blurred by in streaks of gold and gray. Inside the car, the echo of his words pressed against her chest. "Touch her, and you touch me." The phrase looped through her like a heartbeat she could not quiet. Fury battled with something softer, something she refused to name. For the first time since the storm began, she realized she was not standing alone. A line had been drawn in the open, bright as a scar across the city. Damien Voss had marked the world with his vow, and the world had listened. Yet as she sat pressed against the leather seat, her hand trembling in her lap, Nora wondered if she could survive the cost of standing inside that line. The hospital never truly slept, but there were moments in the deep of night when it almost seemed to. Machines hummed like distant lullabies, footsteps softened, and even the most restless patients succumbed to exhaustion. For Nora Hale, these hours were both a refuge and a burden. They reminded her of why she stayed in this job despite its weight. The children clung to stuffed animals, older people who smiled weakly through pain, and the broken families who needed a calm voice to guide them. Yet those same hours also reminded her how heavy solitude could be. It was during one of these nights that the first unexpected gift arrived. 2 new ventilators, 3 syringe pumps, and a gleaming monitor appeared in the pediatric ward as though conjured out of thin air. The technicians who unboxed them gasped like children opening presents on Christmas morning. The head nurse frowned in disbelief, checking the year's budget. No one had approved such equipment, but the invoice was stamped "paid in full by an anonymous donor." A small handwritten note slipped between the lines in the corner of the paperwork. "Do not put up a plaque. If you want to thank me, let the night shift have 10 minutes for tea." Nora's hand shook as she read the words. No signature, but she did not need one. She remembered the chamomile tea left at her door, the sharp handwriting, the initials that haunted her phone. Damien Voss had found a way to invade her sanctuary again, this time not with suited guards but with machines that kept children breathing. She confessed she was furious, but her heart betrayed her by softening against her will. Later that same week, another surprise appeared. This time it came in the shape of stars. A cardboard box labeled Galaxy projector was wheeled into pediatrics. When it was switched on, blue and purple constellations spun slowly across the ceiling. The children gasped, their cries replaced by awe. Even the most restless among them lay still, eyes wide, as the artificial sky turned the ward into a universe of its own. Parents snapped pictures with tears in their eyes, grateful for a moment of wonder. Nora found Rafe Arden leaning in the hall beside the box. He looked almost sheepish, scratching at his collar. "Bit oversized," he muttered. Initially, the boss chose the smaller version, but the clerk said this one was prettier. Nora folded her arms, fighting the smile tugging at her lips. Of course he did. She wanted to scold him, to insist that Damien had no right to interfere in her work. But her throat closed as she watched children who had cried through every night now whispering about meteors and galaxies. She typed a message later that night after deleting it 3 times. "The ventilators work perfectly. Thanks for the sky." Then she pressed send. His reply arrived quickly. "Chamomile tea at 10 p.m. Do not forget the 10 minutes." Her laugh startled her colleagues when it slipped out. She hid her phone, cheeks warm, and told herself not to read too deeply into his words. But the truth was impossible to deny. Damien was weaving threads into her life in ways she could not cut clean. The break room table bore a tray of chamomile tea and butter cookies that night. A note rested beside it. 10 minutes. Orders from the benefactor. A smiley face ended the line. The head nurse chuckled and rolled her eyes, but she poured the tea anyway. Nora carried her cup down to the quiet lobby, where the lights were softer and the shadows kinder. She set her cup on the table and leaned back, exhaustion sinking into her like water filling a stone. "Just 10 minutes," she whispered, and closed her eyes. She did not know when sleep claimed her, only that when she stirred again, a blanket covered her shoulders. A gray blanket that smelled faintly of night air and the same cologne she remembered from the ER. Across from her, Damien sat silently, sleeves rolled up, his coat draped neatly beside him. His eyes were fixed on the revolving doors as though expecting an enemy to step through at any moment. He had not entered the staff areas or touched anything besides the blanket he placed across her, but his presence filled the space like a tide she could not hold back. "When did you get here?" she whispered, clutching the blanket tighter. "Just before you fell asleep," he murmured. "Rafe is outside. I only stayed to make sure you rested. Exactly 10 minutes. Her lips curved despite herself. "Impressive timing. Do not tell the head nurse," he said, the faintest smile brushing his mouth. They shared a quiet laugh, the sound strange against the hush of the lobby. The automatic doors opened and closed with soft sighs. The clock ticked, and the world was gentle for a few rare moments. Nora studied him when she thought he would not notice. Gone were the cameras and the heavy shadows of power. Here sat a man waiting in silence, hands clasped, back straight from habit, but eyes heavy with something else. She realized then that his silence tonight was not the fortress it had been before. It was something closer to surrender. "You do not have to do this," she said softly. "The donations, the machines, the stars, even the blanket. There are things I cannot not do," he answered. "Not because I am good, because I know what it is like to wait for a door that never opens. I will not let someone else stay the same way." Her breath caught at the quiet pain in his words. "You have waited before." He looked down at his hands, unscarred now, though she remembered the gash across his ribs. "I have," he said simply. Then he lifted his gaze. Gray eyes no longer cold but searching. "And when I can, I want to keep someone else from waiting." Nora's throat tightened. She wanted to remind herself that she was not one to melt at pretty words. Years in the ER had hardened her, taught her the difference between comfort and bandages. Yet what he offered was not empty. It was actions that spoke louder than his voice. Machines in the pediatric ward, stars across ceilings, chamomile tea at 10, a blanket over her shoulders. She swallowed hard and forced her tone to be light. "The tea is cold now." "Cold tea still works," he said, mimicking her casual tone. 10 minutes is 10 minutes. She lifted the cup and sipped anyway, letting the warmth linger even if it was faint. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." He dipped his head, the faintest sign of respect. "I stayed outside the door. Sometimes I only hand over a blanket." They both laughed softly, the sound dissolving like steam into the night. Before leaving, she pulled the blanket off her shoulders to return it, but Damien's hand brushed against the fabric, holding it a moment. His eyes met hers, and for the first time since their strange entanglement began, there was no command in them, no strategy, no world of finance looming over them, only a wordless question. "Sleep a little longer," he said quietly, his voice softer than she thought possible. "I am here." The words slid into her like a balm, unexpected and dangerous. "I am here." Two simple words, but they struck deeper than any declaration shouted in front of cameras. She allowed herself to lean back for the first time, eyes drifting shut, trusting that the man who drew storms could hold them back for a moment. Above them, the artificial stars still spun faintly, scattering threads of light across the tiled floor. In the hush of the night lobby, Nora realized something had shifted between them. Not a grand confession, dramatic vow, but a millimeter of movement. Yet sometimes a millimeter is enough to split a straight line into two new paths. And as her eyes closed again beneath the gray blanket, she knew her life had already begun to follow the path where Damien Voss sat waiting in the silence, watching the doors, keeping his promise. The limousine rolled to a slow halt before the hotel's grand entrance, its polished chrome reflecting 1,000 shards of light. Nora Hale sat stiffly in the back seat, her pulse hammering with every flash from the cameras waiting just beyond the tinted glass. She had agreed only because Damien insisted it was necessary. A small party, he had said, only a brief appearance. But the sight that met her eyes through the window was no small gathering. Red carpets stretched like rivers of fire. Chandeliers glittered through towering glass doors. Women in gowns shimmered like constellations under the spotlights. Men in dark suits lined the path, their laughter rolling across the entrance like waves. Cameras crowded against velvet ropes, their shutters snapping rapid-fire bursts. Nora clutched the folds of the pale dress Grace had lent her, her breath shallow. Damien sat beside her, calm as if he belonged to the world outside. His gray eyes turned toward her, sharp yet steady. "Do not worry," he murmured, his hand extending toward hers. "I am here." Her fingers hovered, trembling, before she allowed his palm to close over hers. The touch sent a current through her, making her knees weaker than her high heels. When he stepped out, guiding her down, the noise swelled to a roar. The crowd did not look at him first but at her, the ordinary nurse standing where only heiresses and celebrities usually walked. "Miss Hale," someone whispered with cautious awe. Others began to murmur, the name passing from mouth to mouth, until it became a low chorus. Inside, the ballroom spread like a dream she could not comprehend. Light shattered into fragments under grand chandeliers, violins poured golden notes across the air, and every polished surface reflected faces painted with masks of power. Damien moved among them effortlessly, as though every step had been rehearsed since birth. He greeted men who bowed with careful smiles, shook hands that trembled slightly, and spoke with authority that cut through noise without rising. Nora walked at his side, as if balancing on a knife's edge. Every gaze slid toward her, assessing, questioning, judging. She forced her lips into polite smiles, nodding at strangers who addressed her as though she were already part of Damien's empire. One woman complimented her dress. Nora nearly blurted the truth, that it was borrowed, but she bit her tongue. Another man asked how long she had known Damien. She stammered something vague, her cheeks burning. To them, she was suddenly more than she had ever been. Not Nurse Hale, not Nora from the night shift, but something else entirely, something weighed down by expectation. Damien's hand rested lightly at the small of her back, guiding her through the throng. Each subtle touch reminded her to keep walking. Every time his gaze swept the room, it brushed hers for the briefest second, as though tethering her to him in an invisible line. And then she felt it. Across the hall near a marble column, a man watched with a glass of wine held loosely in his fingers. His eyes were cold, sharper than glass, studying her like she was already a chessboard piece. Victor Lang. She did not know his name yet, but she knew instinctively what he was. A rival, a predator, the kind of man who measured people by their value and sought to shatter them when they became inconvenient. Damien saw him too, his hand pressed harder against her back for the first time that night, a silent warning. Nora glanced up at him, her stomach twisting at the tension that rippled through his body. His polite mask did not falter, but she could feel the storm beneath it. She realized then that this was not just a ballroom, it was a battlefield draped in velvet. Every laugh was a feint, every toast is a weapon, and she was standing in the crossfire. A nurse with no armor, training, or understanding of the rules governing this glittering war. By the time the night drew to a close, her smile ached as though it had been carved into her face. She followed Damien into the cool air, her chest tight with exhaustion and confusion. The limousine door shut behind them, sealing away the roar of voices. She exhaled like she had escaped a stage play, the mask slipping from her face. "See," she said bitterly, "I was utterly lost in there. I am just a nurse. I do not know how to smile like them, or toast them the right way." "You were yourself," Damien interrupted, his voice sharp as steel but softened by something more profound. "That is what makes you different. They bowed to you because you stood beside me." But his tone shifted, lowering, almost tender. "I bow because you dared to walk in there, despite your fear." Her breath caught, her anger faltering under the weight of his words. She turned to the window, unwilling to let him see the warmth rising in her chest. Outside, the city lights blurred into rivers of gold. Inside, silence stretched between them, heavy yet strangely fragile. Nora pressed her forehead to the cool glass and admitted what she had tried to deny since she met his eyes in the ER. She was already tangled in his world, and no matter how much she resisted, each step drew her further in. And somewhere in her heart, a truth whispered with dangerous clarity. Damien Voss was not just a man who drew storms, he was a storm himself, and she had chosen to walk beside him into its center. Rain pressed against the windows that night, a steady rhythm that seemed to echo the turmoil in Nora Hale's chest. She had thought the ballroom was the storm's peak, that nothing could press harder than the eyes of strangers weighing her against Damien Voss's empire. But whispers had a way of growing teeth. Victor Lang's name floated at the edges of conversations she overheard in the hospital, disguised in lowered voices and unfinished sentences. Unaware of her entanglement, even her colleagues repeated rumors with curious glances. To them, it was gossip. To Nora, it was a tightening noose. She saw shadows where none should be and felt eyes on her back that vanished when she turned. The sense of being watched grew heavier with each passing day. Damien had warned her, blunt and unyielding, that Victor Lang would not hesitate to use her as leverage. She wanted to believe she was strong enough to ignore the threat, but fear lingered in every step home from her shift. She clutched her bag tightly, her breath quickening at the sound of footsteps behind her. Sometimes they were real, sometimes they were not. Yet each time, her heart raced as though the ground might open and swallow her. Then one evening, the danger became real. She was meant to meet Grace for dinner, a simple promise that felt like a lifeline back to normalcy. But as Nora walked toward the restaurant, a van stopped beside her. The side door yanked open. Rough hands dragged her inside before she could scream. The world spun. A cloth bag was shoved over her head, and her wrists bound with coarse rope. The muffler her cry doors slam, the engine roaring to life. The ride was a blur of terror. She felt every bump of the road in her bones, heard the low voices of men she could not see, smelled rust and cigarette smoke. She tried to steady her breath and think clearly. Panic would drown her faster than anything. She remembered Damien's words, steady and unshakable. "I will not let anyone touch you." She clung to that vow like a thread, though she had no reason to trust it could reach her now. When the van finally stopped, she was dragged into a building that smelled of damp wood and metal decay. The bag was ripped from her head, and she blinked against the dim light. Rust streaked the walls, water dripped from a leaking roof, and shadows pressed in from every corner, an abandoned warehouse. They tied her to a chair in the center of the room, leaving her with wrists bound and ankles heavy against the cold floor. The men spoke in low tones she could not fully hear. Then the iron door screeched open. A man entered, his face narrow, his smile sharp enough to cut. He carried himself with sickly confidence, as though the shadows bent for him. "Miss Hale," he said with mock politeness, "apologies for the inconvenience." Her voice shook, but she forced strength into it. "Who are you?" He chuckled, swirling a glass of wine he carried with unsettling casualness. "Who I am is not important. What matters is that you are very valuable to someone I know. We only want a little cooperation from your boyfriend." He let the word drip with disdain. "He is not my boyfriend," Nora spat, though the tremor in her chest betrayed her fear. "Oh, but the press says otherwise." The man's smile widened, and more importantly, Damien Voss believes otherwise. "He will do anything to keep you safe. This is why he will sign over the Riverside project to me tomorrow, and in return, you will go home." Her heart sank. She knew enough from whispers at the hospital and the murmurs of staff to understand the Riverside project was a keystone deal, something Damien had fought to secure. Giving it up would not just mean a loss, it would mean weakness, vulnerability. "And if he does not sign?" she asked, her voice low. The man's smile grew crueler. "Then you stay here forever." He left with a flourish, the iron door slamming shut behind him. Darkness closed in, broken only by the steady water drip from the roof. Nora's chest heaved. Fear surged like a tidal wave, but anger sparked within it. If Damien signed, he would lose everything. If he refused, she would be lost. Her thoughts raced until one of the guards shoved a phone into her hands, its speaker already on. A voice crackled through, cold and commanding. "Any last words for Mr. Voss?" Nora's breath trembled, but she forced steel into her voice. "Damien, listen to me. Do not sign. Do not trade everything for me. I trust you to find another way." For a heartbeat, silence answered her, long enough that she thought the call had failed. Then his voice came, steady and deep, more certain than she had ever heard. "Hold on, I am coming." The guard snorted and yanked the phone away, snapping it shut. But inside Nora, the fear that had nearly drowned her ebbed just enough to let a spark of light through. He was coming. He had promised. Meanwhile, in the towering glass office of Voss Holdings, advisors crowded around Damien, urging him to sign. "It is just one project, Mr. Voss. Sign it. Get her back." But Damien's eyes, storm gray and unyielding, cut through their pleas. No signature. His voice was razor sharp. "Lang wants to corner me. He will see the consequences." Rafe stood at his side, his own gaze hard with resolve. "We have narrowed it down to 4 warehouses near the docks. Vehicles are ready." Damien pulled on his coat, each motion deliberate, as though unsheathing a blade. "Prepare. I am going." "Boss, let us," Rafe began. "No," Damien cut him off. "Lang wants me, not you. And Nora. She is inside my circle, no one else touches her." The decision was final. Back in the warehouse, Nora strained against her ropes, her wrists raw, her body aching. Every sound outside the door sent her heart racing. She whispered Damien's words under her breath like a prayer. "Hold on, I am coming." She did not know how he would do it, she only knew she had to believe. Rain battered the roof harder, the air cold and damp. Shadows stretched across the walls, and fear pressed in with every second. But amid the darkness, one truth gave her strength. Damien would not trade his empire for her life. He would fight, and she would fight too, with whatever strength she had left, to meet him halfway when he arrived. The kidnapper's bargain hung over her like a blade. But Nora had already made her choice. She trusted Damien to find another way, and for the first time since the storm began, that trust steadied her against the weight of fear. Rain lashed against the corrugated roof of the warehouse, each drop a drumbeat counting down to the inevitable collision. Inside, the air smelled of rust, damp wood, and stale fear. Nora Hale sat bound to a chair in the center of the room, her wrists raw from the ropes, her breath shallow but steady. She replayed Damien's words, holding them like a shield. "Hold on, I am coming." Her captors paced like restless animals. Some leaned against crates, cigarettes burning in the shadows. Others polished knives or checked their weapons with grim precision. They expected an exchange, a contract signed, a victory handed to their master without resistance. But Nora knew Damien. He would not sign, He would fight, and the thought both terrified and steadied her. The iron door rattled open. Victor Lang strode in, his smile thin, his suit immaculate even in this ruin. He carried himself with the arrogance of a man who believed he had already won. "So, Miss Hale," he drawled, circling her like a predator, "do not worry. By tomorrow, your savior will give me what I want. One project for one life." Nora lifted her chin, her voice hoarse but sharp. "You underestimate him." Lang chuckled, swirling the wineglass in his hand. "Men like Voss all have a price. I have simply found his." He stopped before her, his gaze narrowing. "And if he refuses, well, then you are merely collateral." The words cut, but she refused to flinch. She stared into his cold eyes, forcing steel into her tone. "He will not give you what you want. He will come, and when he does, you will see the difference between power borrowed and power earned." Lang's smile faltered momentarily before he set the glass aside and left, the door screeching closed again. The minutes stretched. The drip of water echoed. Fear clawed at Nora's chest, but a spark burned stubbornly beneath it. She believed him. Damien would come. Outside, the storm grew heavier. Black vehicles rolled through the docks, their headlights slicing the rain-soaked darkness. Men in tactical gear moved with silent precision, weapons steady, eyes sharp. At their center walked Damien Voss, his long coat snapping in the wind, his jaw set, his eyes alight with cold fire. His wound from days ago throbbed under the fabric, reopened by the weight of his resolve, but he ignored it. Nothing mattered except the circle he had drawn around Nora. Rafe Arden caught pace beside him. "Boss, let us handle the perimeter. Lang wants you distracted." Damien shook his head, his voice like steel. "Lang wants me. He will get me, but no one touches her." The team split, securing exits, cutting through guards. Gunfire cracked in the distance, and shouts ricocheted off rusted metal walls. Damien surged through the chaos, his body moving with a brutal efficiency born of rage and necessity. One man lunged, and Damien disarmed him with a swift twist, sending his weapon clattering across the wet floor. Another charged, only to be floored by a single strike. Every step carved a path deeper into the warehouse, closer to the center where Nora waited. The door burst open with a clang. Flashlights pierced the dark. Shouts filled the air. "Drop your weapons." Nora's heart lurched as figures stormed inside. And then she saw him. Damien moved through the storm like an arrow loosed from its string. His coat swept behind him, his fists struck with unyielding force. Even the air seemed to part before him. Victor Lang grabbed her, pressing a knife to her throat, his sneer curdling the air. "The contract, Cole. Sign it, and she walks free. Refuse, and she dies here." Damien froze in the center of the room, his chest heaving, his wound seeping through his shirt. But his voice cut the silence, cold and merciless. "You do not understand, Lang. There are things I can sell, and things I can discard. But this woman is not on any list." Lang's sneer faltered. "Just a nurse," he spat, trying to recover. "Do not make me laugh." Damien's eyes flickered only once toward Nora, steady and unshaken. "Precisely because she is ordinary, she is real. More real than anything you or I trade." The knife wavered, Lang's grip loosening in the weight of those words. In that split second, Damien lunged. Pain seared as the blade sliced his arm, blood spraying across the floor. But he knocked the weapon free, sending it clattering into the shadows. Chaos erupted, blows landed, crates splintered. The warehouse roared with the sound of battle. Nora squeezed her eyes shut, her body trembling as shouts and grunts filled the room. Then silence cracked through the chaos, sharp and sudden. She opened her eyes. Lang lay sprawled on the ground, blood trickling from his lip. His men were subdued, dragged away by Damien's team. Damien staggered toward her, one hand clamped to his abdomen where blood soaked his shirt, the other trembling as he tore away her ropes. "You," Nora whispered, Nora, tears spilling freely, "you actually came." "Did you think I would let them keep you?" he rasped, his gray eyes burning even as his body threatened to collapse. "No one has that right." She wanted to scold him, to scream at his recklessness, but the words died on her tongue. Instead, she pressed her palms desperately to his wound, crimson flooding through her fingers. "Why do you always make yourself the shield? Do you think you are immortal?" His lips twisted into a faint, painful smile. "Not immortal, But at least now I know I am worth your worry." Her chest broke open, sobs shaking her as she clutched him tighter. "If you die, then how am I supposed to go on?" His trembling hand brushed her cheek, feather light. "Then you will go on because you are stronger than you think." "No," she choked. "I do not want to be that strong. I just want you alive." Outside, Rafe and the others stormed back in, securing Lang in chains, but Nora barely noticed. The world had narrowed to Damien's weakening body slumped against her, his eyes glinting with strange pride even as blood poured from him. "See," he whispered faintly, "I did not sign a thing. I chose you." Nora bit her lip until she tasted copper, fighting back a scream of grief. "Stop talking. Save your strength." Rain battered the roof. Sirens wailed in the distance. Guards lifted Damien, but his hand clung to hers until the last second, his gray eyes refusing to let go. As they carried him out into the storm, Nora stumbled beside him, trying to staunch the wound with trembling hands. Terror threatened to consume her, but through it echoed one truth so fierce it steadied her. He had risked everything, not for power or contracts, but for her. And in that moment, amid rain, blood, and the chaos of battle, Nora realized her heart was no longer hers. It had fallen, irrevocably, into the storm of Damien Voss. The storm outside raged with relentless fury as the ambulance tore through the rain-slicked streets. Sirens screamed into the night, red and blue lights flickering across puddles like broken shards of glass. Inside, Nora Hale sat beside Damien, her trembling hands pressed hard against the wound in his abdomen. Warm blood seeped through every layer of gauze, burning her skin, making every nerve scream with terror. "Stay with me," she whispered repeatedly, her voice breaking each time. "Do not fall asleep. Look at me, Damien." His gray eyes fluttered open, struggling to find her face amid the chaos. Even in his weakness, there was a spark of defiance, the pride of a man who refused to surrender. But beneath it, she glimpsed something raw and fragile he had hidden from everyone else. For her, he let the steel fall away. The ambulance screeched to a halt outside the hospital. Doctors and nurses swarmed, their movements sharp and precise. Nora stumbled beside the stretcher, refusing to release his hand. She cried out to the staff, her voice hoarse, "I am a nurse, let me help." No one dared argue. Bright sterile lights cut through the night, antiseptics stung the air, and voices rose in urgent commands. Blood pressure dropping, prep for surgery. "For lines are in now." Nora's hands shook as she cut away his blood-soaked shirt, revealing the deep gash that had reopened from the warehouse fight. Her eyes blurred with tears, but she forced herself to stay steady, stitching and bandaging with desperate precision, refusing to let her fear break her. Every prick of the needle into his skin felt like it pierced her own heart. "You are insane," she muttered, tears dripping onto her gloves, "and always running head first into danger. Always making yourself the shield. Have you ever once thought about what happens if you fall? How am I supposed to live if you are gone?" Damien tried to smile, his lips curving faintly as pain twisted through him. "At least now," he whispered weakly, "I know I am worth your worry." Her sob caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, to curse him for being reckless, but the words dissolved into tears. All she could do was cling to his hand, terrified of losing its warmth. Hours stretched into eternity until at last the surgery ended. Damien was wheeled into recovery, his breathing shallow but steady. The doctor's voice finally brought relief. "Serious, but not fatal. He needs days of rest." Nora stayed by his side, carefully replacing the bandages, her hands tender as they had been the night they first met. In the quiet recovery room, the yellow light softened his sharp features, making him look less like the ruthless tycoon, and more like a man worn down by battles too many to count. "Do you remember that night," she whispered, "when I stitched you up? You told me not to get involved, and now look at us." His storm-gray eyes opened slowly, heavy with exhaustion but steady as steel. He stared at her for a long moment before rasping, "I was wrong." Her heart stilled. "Wrong. I could lose everything," Damien continued, each word etched into the silence. "I could lose projects, contracts, even my empire, but I cannot lose you." The beeping heart monitor filled the quiet with its steady rhythm, each beat pounding like a vow. Tears spilled hot down Nora's cheeks, falling onto his hand. She wanted to argue, remind him of the dangers, and put distance back between them. But the truth swelling inside her was undeniable. She loved him. Damien lifted his trembling hand, slow but unyielding, and closed it around hers. I do not know how to love like other men. All I know is how to shield, fight, and protect. Sometimes clumsy, sometimes too much. But if you let me, I will learn for you. Her throat locked, too full for words. She bent down, pressing her forehead to his, whispering, "Me too. I do not know when it happened, but I love you too." The distance between them vanished. The kiss that followed was soft and trembling, not born of strategy or pretense, but of truth stripped bare. Not for cameras, not for power games, not for enemies, but for themselves. The hospital lights blurred above them. Rain still fell outside, but none of it mattered. Only the warmth of his lips, the rhythm of their hearts finding the same beat, and the unspoken promise that neither would face the storm alone from this moment. When they parted, Nora laughed softly through her tears. "Do you know I hate your world? Its shadows, its dangers, but I cannot hate you." Damien exhaled, the corner of his mouth lifting faintly. "Good, because I have no intention of letting you leave it." And in the fragile light of dawn, as the city stirred awake, two souls who had once belonged to different worlds found themselves bound together, not by contracts or circumstance, but by love fierce enough to weather any storm. In the morning, golden sunlight spilled across the city, and Damien Voss left the hospital. The wound still weakened his body, his steps slower than the stride that once commanded entire boardrooms, but his presence had not diminished. Beside him walked Nora Hale, her hand lightly on his arm, guiding him more than supporting, their silence filled with something unspoken but powerful. The world outside had not paused for their storm. Newspapers blared headlines about the failed kidnapping, investors speculated wildly, and whispers about the nurse who had stolen the heart of the city's most ruthless tycoon filled every corner of the financial district. For days, Nora avoided the papers, the screens, even her colleagues' curious glances. She wanted the quiet of their hospital nights, the stolen moments of tea and whispered confessions. But Damien knew the world was watching, and he had no intention of keeping her hidden. That evening, as chandeliers blazed in the grand hall of the financial center, the city's most powerful gathered for the annual summit. Suits gleamed under the lights, jewels glittered on elegant gowns, and cameras flashed along the red carpet. Every eye turned as the doors opened. Damien entered, tall and steady despite the lingering ache of his wound. His tailored suit was flawless, his expression sharp, every inch the king of finance he had always been. But what silenced the crowd was not his power, it was the woman at his side. Nora walked beside him in a pale blue dress, luminous yet straightforward, her hair swept back without diamonds or crowns, her hand held firmly in his. She felt the weight of 100 eyes, whispers curling around her like smoke. "That is the nurse. I cannot believe he brought her, a tycoon and an ordinary nurse." Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might break free from her chest. She wanted to pull back, to vanish under the gazes that judged her worth. But Damien's grip tightened, grounding her with unshakable strength. Step by step, he led her into the hall as if it had always been meant for her. When they reached the center, silence rippled like a wave. Damien released her hand only to draw her closer, his gray eyes sweeping across the crowd with the force of a storm. His voice carried deep and clear, cutting through the hush. "This is Nora Hale, the only woman who belongs to me, and if anyone dares touch her, they touch me." The air froze. Reporters swallowed hard. Investors lowered their eyes. Business rivals shifted uneasily. In that single moment, the king of finance bent his pride not to power but to love, and none dared laugh. Cameras flashed again, capturing not scandal, but a declaration that would burn itself into the city's memory. Nora looked up at him, tears shimmering in her eyes. It was not the protection of bodyguards or the shadow of wealth that surrounded her now. It was his heart, placed openly in her hands before the world. Later that night, when the crowd dispersed and the lights dimmed, they walked along the quiet street outside. Nora's voice trembled as she broke the silence. "Do you know what you have done?" Damien turned, his eyes softening. "I have given them the truth. I will never let them question who you are to me." Her lips parted, her protest faltered, and instead she pressed her forehead to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her. For the first time, she realized she no longer stood in his shadow. They stood side by side, facing the storm together, and as the night breeze carried the scent of rain and city lights flickered above, Nora Hale knew her life would never again be ordinary. She belonged not to the whispers of doubt, but to the man who had risked everything to claim her before the world. The journey to Nora Hale's family home was more daunting for Damien Voss than any boardroom battle he had ever fought. The steel towers of the financial district had never unsettled him, but the thought of facing the quiet living room where Nora's parents waited made his pulse run sharp and heavy. He had conquered markets, silenced rivals, and torn empires from the hands of enemies. Yet tonight he carried no contracts, no strategy, only the weight of a vow. Nora sat beside him in the car, her fingers interlaced with his. The drive stretched longer than it should have, the silence thick between them. She could sense the tension in his jaw, the way his hands gripped the leather armrest with unusual unease. For the first time since she had known him, Damien looked uncertain. "My parents are protective," she said softly, almost apologetically. "They know your reputation, the rumors." Damien's lips curved faintly, though his eyes fixed on the window. "I have faced worse." But she felt the lie in the stiffness of his shoulders. He was not afraid of judgment from strangers, but tonight their verdict mattered more than stockholders, more than investors. Tonight he would stand not as the king of finance, but as a man asking for trust. The house was modest, on a quiet street lined with maple trees. Warm light spilled from the windows, and the faint scent of jasmine drifted from the garden. Nora's heart twisted with longing at the familiar comfort. She had grown up within those walls, dreaming simple dreams, never imagining that one day she would return with a man whose world carried both wealth and blood. Her mother opened the door first, her hand flying to her mouth at seeing them. "Nora!" she gasped, pulling her daughter into a fierce embrace. Her eyes then shifted warily to Damien, narrowing with hesitation. Behind her, Nora's father stood firm, his gaze steady and appraising. "Please come in," her mother said, though her tone trembled. The living room smelled faintly of cinnamon and old books. Family portraits lined the walls, photographs of birthdays and graduations, fragments of a life untouched by empires or enemies. Damien stood tall, yet humbled in that space, his sharp suit oddly out of place against the worn sofa and crocheted pillows. Nora's father spoke first, his voice calm but edged with steel. "We know who you are, Mr. Voss. We have heard enough stories to understand the kind of world you live in. My daughter is everything to us. Tell me why she should tie her life to yours." The question cut through the room like a blade. Damien lowered himself to one knee before them, which stunned even Nora. His voice was steady, stripped of arrogance. "Because she is the only person who has ever seen me not as a power, but as a man. She saved me when no one else could. And I will protect her with everything I have. If I ever break that promise, I accept the judgment of this family." Her mother's eyes brimmed with tears, torn between fear and tenderness. Nora clutched Damien's shoulder, her voice soft but resolute. "He means it, Mama. You saw the headlines, but you did not see the warehouse. He nearly died because of me, and he did not trade a single thing for my life. He chose me." The silence stretched long and heavy. Nora's father studied Damien's face, searching not for words but for truth. And he found not the ruthless tycoon the world feared, but a man trembling with the weight of love. Finally he sighed, his sternness softening into reluctant acceptance. "Then make my daughter happy." Damien bowed his head, the smallest exhale breaking through his composure. Nora caught his hand when he rose, squeezing it with a trembling smile. For the first time since the storm began, she felt the circle widening, her family's acceptance weaving into the vow she and Damien had carved in blood and fire. The evening stretched into laughter and cautious warmth. Her mother served tea with shaky hands, her father asked questions about work and daily life, and Damien answered humbly, surprising even Nora. He spoke less of wealth and more of how Nora had taught him to find peace in the simplest things. Her mother hugged them both when they left, whispering a quiet blessing. Outside, under the starlit sky, Nora turned to Damien, her eyes shimmering. "You did it." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her hair. "No, we did it." At that moment, she knew that love was not just about surviving storms, but also about standing together in the calm after, when the world asked for proof and they gave it without fear. The judgment had been passed, not in a boardroom or battlefield, but in the living room of a modest house. And Damien Voss had emerged, not as a king, but as the man who had finally found his home. The wedding day unfolded, not in a gilded ballroom or a cathedral laced with marble, but in a quiet garden bathed in the honey glow of a late afternoon sun. Rows of white and pale blue blossoms lined a narrow path that led to a simple arch woven with ivy and lilies. There was no glitter of chandeliers, no blinding spotlight. Only the soft hum of cicadas, the laughter of children chasing petals, and the hush of friends and family gathered to witness. Nora Hale stood at the edge of the aisle, her dress flowing like water, her hair adorned with tiny blossoms plucked from the garden where she had once played as a child. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with a rush of joy that seemed too large for her body to contain. When she looked up, she saw Damien Voss waiting at the arch, his suit immaculate, but his eyes unguarded in a way no one else had ever seen. He was the same man who had once entered her hospital, bleeding and silent. The same man who had stood in the storm of gunfire to protect her. The same man who had vowed before her parents that he would risk everything for her happiness. But today, he was no king, mogul, or untouchable tycoon. He was simply hers. The minister's voice was steady, carrying softly over the garden. "Do you, Nora Hale, choose to walk beside this man through storms and through peace?" Her eyes shimmered, her voice trembling but firm. "I do." "And do you, Damien Voss, vow to protect and cherish this woman, even if the world demands everything of you?" Damien lowered his forehead to hers, his words etched with steel and tenderness. "I do. Even if I lose everything, I cannot lose you." Applause erupted, petals lifted on the breeze, and in that timeless moment, their kiss sealed not a contract, but a vow that reached deeper than any signature ever could. Life after the wedding was not free of storms. Whispers continued, rivals circled, and the world demanded its pound of flesh. But within the walls of their new home, warmth replaced fear. The house was not extravagant, but every corner was filled with laughter, the scent of coffee, and the soft hum of everyday love. One golden morning, Nora stood in the kitchen brewing coffee, the simple apron tied at her waist. Sunlight streamed through the window, carrying the fragrance of jasmine from the nearby park. Damien stepped behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, his chin resting gently on her shoulder. "The day you bandaged me," he murmured, lips brushing her hair, "you bandaged more than a wound. You bandaged my entire life." She laughed softly, tears threatening as she turned to face him. "Then let me keep doing it. Because I am not just your nurse, Damien. I am your woman." His eyes, once gray steel, now softened into something luminous, something no storm could erase. He bent down and kissed her, the taste of morning coffee lingering between them, sweet and grounding. Outside, the city roared on relentlessly, deals struck and lost, fortunes rising and falling. But in that small kitchen, amid the scent of coffee and the strength of their embrace, Nora and Damien had found something greater than power, greater than fear, greater than the storms that had once threatened to consume them. They had found love. And for Damien Voss, a man who had once thought himself unbreakable yet alone. And for Nora Hale, a woman who had once believed her life would remain ordinary. That love was the only empire that would never crumble. It was the vow of forever.